In most university towns, there is some friction between the institution and its students and the locals who call the town home. Today, that's likely to express itself, for example, in complaints about student parking written in angry letters to the Board of Trustees. But in the past, this competition between town and gown has metastasized into something larger, including looting, violence, even murder. One of the earliest and most violent examples of this competition occurred on February 10th, 1355, in Oxford, England. The Battle of St. Scholastica Day is history that deserves to be remembered. The University of Oxford is the oldest university in the English-speaking world, and the second oldest continually operating university after the University of Bologna. The exact date of its founding is uncertain, but the university claims that teaching at the location existed as early as 1096. In the Middle Ages, universities were primarily religious institutions and provided education both for priests and scribes employed by the crown. For rulers in the Middle Ages, this made them doubly important. They needed scholars and the blessing of the church, so they gave universities many special privileges and protections. Students at Oxford were given many privileges. The university's first charter stipulated that the university was a clerical enclave and was not to be subject to lay jurisdiction. Students could not be sued in court outside their diocese and were exempt from paying certain taxes. The university itself had a large say over the town. The university negotiated with the town for low prices in lodging, food, and other tasks and goods associated with supporting the college. On February 10th, 1355, the feast day of Saint Scholastica, a sister of Saint Benedict, two students ordered a drink at the Swindlestock Tavern in town. Tradition claims their names were Walter Springhouse and Roger de Chesterfield. Sources disagree as to whether they ordered beer or wine, but whatever they ordered, they didn't like it. They exchanged snappish words with the tavern owner, John Croydon, who answered with stubborn and saucy language. The students threw their drinks in his face and assaulted him. It wasn't uncommon for students to assault people in the streets, although often they were assaulting other students. But John Croydon apparently decided he wasn't going to let this slide, and began assembling his friends and family. Town bailiffs demanded that the students make amends, but they refused. The mayor, John de Barrowford, asked the chancellor of the university to arrest the boys, but this too was refused. The riots began to get out of control when townsfolk rang the church bells and called the town to arms. The students rang the university bell in response and rallied around the accused students. A brawl broke out and the chancellor fled, but according to university accounts, the students held their ground and the townsfolk dispersed. In the morning, the mayor left to lay a complaint before King Edward III at nearby Woodstock. The townsfolk, their anger not cooled by a night's sleep, rode through the countryside, rounding up recruits to take revenge on the university. Town and university accounts differ on who was the aggressor, but town accounts claim that the students spent the second day setting fires and robbing the innocent townspeople. At dinner, a group of townsfolk ambushed the exercising students with bows and arrows. The first deaths of the riot seem to have occurred then, and fighting escalated. By Wednesday afternoon, some 2,000 country people arrived, holding a black banner and chanting, "Slay, slay, havoc, havoc, smite fast, and give good knocks." The town's makeshift army stormed the university, and the students held them off only briefly, according to the university, because they ran out of weapons. The fleeing students were chased through the university grounds, where the locals began destroying or looting everything they could find. Armed mostly with bows and arrows, they sacked the scholars' halls, burning and killing with impunity. The chancellor rode off to petition the king for aid, and while he was gone, the riot took on an even darker character. A group of friars tried to appeal to the locals' religious morals by forming a procession to march through them, carrying a pyx, a small, often highly decorated container which held bread consecrated by the priests. Unmoved, the mob attacked the column and, according to university sources, even threw the pyx with the consecrated host onto the ground. Some of the murdered scholars were even scalped, a deliberate action meant to mock how students tonsured their hair. Others were thrown bleeding into the town's prison. Some few students found refuge in the university's church, but many more just fled the city entirely, leaving for other schools. The riot lasted 3 days, punctuated by long lulls and terrible violence. Some 30 townsfolk were killed in the fighting, but the students fared much worse, with 63 killed in the so-called battle. King Edward appointed a commission of judges to investigate the incident, and both the university and the town surrendered their charters, which granted them rights over what they could govern. The king returned the university's charter shortly after. The king's judges decided the town had instigated the riot, and so Edward punished them accordingly. The town may not have its charter returned for a year or more, and even then had its rights and privileges curtailed. The university already had enormous influence over the town, but now received even more. They were given more control over the assessees of bread and ale, which controlled the prices of those goods in the town, and control over assessing taxes on a wide net of professions, including illuminators, servants, bookmakers, and anyone else associated with the university. The king, who relied on the church and scholars to direct his armies and the kingdom at large, also ordered the town to return or compensate the scholars for all their lost or damaged property, and fine them a significant sum beyond that. The mayor, John de Bareford, was imprisoned for his part in the riot, but not executed. He would live to return to the good graces of the church. Edward also encouraged the students to return to Oxford by assuring them that they would not be fined or punished for any crimes they may have committed during the riot. The church was just as quick to punish the town for the riot. The town was put under an interdict for a year, which meant that the town was denied the services of the church and sacred rites, including mass, baptism, and marriage. As penance, the mayor of Oxford and 62 other leading citizens were made to attend a special service every year on the 10th of February to pray for those students killed in the riot, and each man was to give a penny to the church, a penny for each of the scholars killed. 40 pence of this went to scholarships for the university, and the rest went to the university's church. Today the fine of 63 pence may seem paltry, but it was not insignificant. In 1355, a penny was enough to pay for a full day's worth of food for a scholar. Though the riot might seem small by modern standards, it involved a significant percentage of the town's population and had long-lasting political consequences for the town of Oxford. The riot was unique for the time, too. Certainly violence was not rare in medieval Oxford, or as one historian put it, there's probably not a single yard of ground in any part of the classic High Street that lies between St. Martin and St. Mary's which has not, at one time or another, been stained with blood. There are historic battlefields on which less has been spilt. In fact, altercations between town and gown were common before 1355, but were usually contained to bar fights, injuries, and only rarely involved any killings. None were as violent as the St. Scholastica riot. Part of what might have made this particular riot so violent was beyond the control of either the town or the university. Oxford was a town in decline, at least in part because of the Black Death, which had killed as much as a third of the town less than a decade earlier. Though the university was a significant economic driver for the town, the decline left psychological burden on the town, and one in which the special privileges of the university loomed large. The school, too, struggled in those years, with its membership sinking steadily in the 14th century. This conflict between university students and a barkeep was indicative of the competition for economic resources. Universities are put in an unenviable position of having to pay a town's prices for the goods and services that they need to operate, and that includes alcohol, which is apparently important to universities of any age. And the shadow of the Black Death and the shrinking university meant that more mundane concerns like high prices for bad alcohol could be like a spark to a powder keg and erupt into violence. But maybe just as important was the competition between the ecclesiastical university and the public. The church had a lot of authority in medieval Europe and had a lot of control over medieval society, and things like throwing down the pisk or scalping tonsures into students was a sign of a latent anti-clericalism that was perhaps inevitable in a time of church rule. But whatever the immediate causes for the riots, the extent of its violence was clearly intertwined with the social, economic, and religious conflicts of the day. And it tells us that those trivial conflicts that we have between universities and their communities today are very small by comparison. The church dictated that the town pay that annual penance in perpetuity, and they continued to do so for more than 500 years. It wasn't until the 1800s that some mayors started refusing to pay. And Parliament did not officially free the town of Oxford from that requirement until 1955. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.